today's webinar entitled Constructing a Plan for Success, Effective Strategies in Hiring. My name is Billy Zadek, Manager Special Programs for APA. As always, just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar recording will be posted to the APA webpage under the Continuous Learning tab later today. Professional continuing education certificates are being offered for today's program. Those who indicated they wanted a certificate at registration and meet the requirements will receive their certificates later this afternoon. All attendees are in listen-only mode. Please type your questions in the chat box, and they will be answered in the order they are received. If we run out of time and we still have questions, responses will be sent directly to the person asking the question by one of our presenters. At this time, it's my pleasure to turn this over to our speakers for today's webinar. Ladies, take it away.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. We're very happy to be here with you today. I don't know where you are, but most likely wherever you are, there's a fair amount of heat and humidity. So we'll try to keep it an even cool in this webinar. We're very happy to be here with you today, and we will introduce ourselves and talk a little bit about our company, Opus Partners. I'm Katie Dean, a partner with Opus for going on 20 years. Opus is a executive search firm based in Philadelphia with offices in Charlottesville, Virginia, Portland, Oregon, and Chicago. We are a search firm that focuses primarily on higher education, academic medicine, and not-for-profits. We do mostly work on the administrative side of the house, and in that offer have done many deep track record in searches in the facilities world, starting back in 2003 and up to date have done nearly 150 searches for positions that range from vice president for facilities to director level and sort of everything in between. So I've been with Opus, as I said, for 20 years, so have been lucky to be a part of many of those searches. Prior to joining Opus, I worked in another search firm, and my early career was in social work. So, so that's a little bit about me, and I'll let my colleague Kenna introduce herself.
Thanks, Katie. I'm Kenna Boyd. I'm based in our Charlottesville office, and Katie is right. The heat is here. It is going to inch up, I'm sure, close to the mid-90s today. So, so we love the summer. But good to see you all. I am so pleased to be able to be here and talk to you about one of our favorite things to do, which is search, hiring, but in particular in the facilities planning and management space. Katie mentioned the long track record and history in this space, and we thoroughly enjoy our partnership with all of you. I've been doing search work for about 8 years. Prior to that, I was at the University of Virginia as the Director of Donor Relations and Special Events in our advancement office. And have been known to partner with our facilities teams to host large events on our campus and grounds. And the work you all do at every level is so important to your organization. And we know right now is a particularly stressful time in finding talent and understanding how to navigate the process. So we're going to jump into our presentation. Some of the slides that I'm about to share, we've already discussed. So I'll tick through those quickly, but we're just happy to be here today. So give me 1 second to see if I can make technology work for us. We're going to turn our cameras off. And let me see if I can share my screen. I'm going to look to Katie to ask if she is seeing our presentation.
Yes. All set. Yep.
Great. All right. I'll go ahead and go through these first few slides, which we've already given you a bit of overview. We'll share this slide after the meeting so that you have it. Talks a little bit about our firm. Obviously, you have Katie and I's email addresses if you have questions after the fact. Talked a little bit about our track record and the number of searches in the facility space in particular that we have managed. Katie, before I move forward, is there anything else you'd want to share about our track record?
Thank you. Yeah, so I think one of the things that Opus brings to a search process is that we have the ability and time and energy and effort to kind of go beyond and bring a slate of candidates to a search and really move into the field and draw draw into and draw out of the professional community candidates for a search that may not have applied for a job. And so we really understand how difficult it can be to find good candidates. What we do as a partner to an institution is, reach into the places that you may not have the manpower to reach into, and really understand and map the universe for a role so that you really know what you're dealing with and what the market really is and how to be competitive in that market. And we're perfectly aware that this market in particular, especially around roles in the trades and in project management and some other particulars, how hard it is to find and retain good people on your team. So because we've been doing this work for a long time, we've done a lot of searches in this space, we really understand where the challenges are. We're really pleased that we have a chance to share some of our knowledge with you, but really want to recognize that we can really appreciate how hard this can be. And so because we've worked with a lot of firms and a lot of potential candidates through the years, we've learned a lot about what it takes to be a good partner and what it takes to run a good search. So we're really glad to be able to share that with you today. So part of what we'll do today is sort of look into what you can do as an individual or as a search committee or as an institution when you're preparing for a search, and really using some good practices to draw in, to excite people about, to have a sense of who has applied for your job, and to really understand what makes a good candidate, what makes a good process, what makes a good selection, and some sort of tips for how to do that along the way. And again, understanding that those are all things that can be very challenging to do. So we're happy to give you a few ideas and some thoughts about how to manage all of those processes.
Thanks, Katie. So just our session overview, just so you can follow along on how we're going to break this session apart. We're going to start with the pre-launch planning. Really, the success starts before you launch a search. Identifying talent sources, where to look for talent and how to approach candidates, candidate communication, what and when to share, navigating internal candidate interest, common pitfalls where a search can go wrong. Also, maybe we'll share how to get back on track. We've been able to partner with many of you to do that. Onboarding and retention strategies. While we love to partner with you on finding great talent and bringing new individuals or helping you move internal individuals forward into a new role, we also know it is so important to retain good talent. And so there are some really key things that you can do to do that. And then we'll conclude and open it up for Q&A. So I'm going to get us started with success starts before you launch. So planning, prepping, and organizing before you launch the posting is so important. And that means you're going to be doing a thorough job analysis. You really want to define clear hiring criteria and align the process with organizational needs so that you have an effective search. So let's start with kind of this first piece of job analysis and criteria and definition. That goes beyond just the job description that you partner with your HR team to produce, the thing that typically lives in, whether it's Workday or PeopleSoft, wherever you're posting your jobs internally, and then ultimately externally. Those typically have those, key duties, and they can be pretty generic. I think you have to be in some ways because there is a job that you are describing that takes a specific skill set. But I think the intangibles are what really will help you find the right person for your position. And those are things that we have found you can really get a sense of by doing some listening sessions. They do take some time, but it's a good investment of time. When we've been able to partner with you and the institutions as well as business partners and do listening sessions, we learn things that we're able to share back with our client that maybe they didn't know. So if you aren't working with a search firm or a partner, you can do these internally, and they really don't have to be long or cumbersome. They can be via Zoom, They can be a quick phone call. They can be a lunch and listen and learn. But really what you want to do is you want to understand the needs of the role from the various perspectives of your team. So you want to talk to the folks who are above you. What are they looking for? What are they currently not seeing in the organization? You want to talk to your peers. What have you seen as you've brought in new people that have been very effective here at our place? You really want to hear when they talk about the opportunities they see for the role. And you want to talk to the people that are doing the work, people that may be reporting to this person or people that may be working with them as a peer. You want to really hear from all of those individuals about what they see in 3 buckets. We always say, what are the key opportunities? What should a person get excited about if they're coming here to do this job? What are the key challenges? What are going to be the things that you want this person to do when they walk in the door? What's going to be on the to-do list? Sometimes we'll say, what's your top 5? What are the top 5 things you hope this person takes on and is successful at doing? And the last piece is, what do you think the key qualities and characteristics are that this person needs to bring with them to be successful? Those listening sessions are going to really help you define a position description that is beyond just the duties that are described in the work. The other thing that we find is really helpful is if you can use phrases like preferred versus required. There are some roles where you are required to have a certain certification. You must be a PE. You must have a certain degree. You must have a certain level of training or certifications in your area of expertise. But if it's not 100% required to do the job, our recommendation is that you use the phrase preferred in your job description. That is going to allow more people to come forward and to raise their hand to be considered. We know from experience in this space, there are a lot of individuals that have worked their way up from working in custodial or landscaping or any facet of the work. They've been on a construction site with one of your business partners and they've worked their way up. And because they've had 20 plus years of experience, maybe they didn't get that master's degree, or they didn't get the certification yet that you're looking for. You don't want to miss out on at least getting to know about them and their interests. So when you use the word preferred versus required, it gives you a lot of abilities to talk to more people. You can still make it a key criteria that you want to talk to the candidate about. If you say, you don't have this certification, but would you be willing to go and get that? It might be important in your organization to have that skill, but maybe it's not required walking in the door. The last piece, when you're crafting your job description, as you're putting in notes about your listening session, you're thinking about preferred versus required. You also want to state the work that you're doing that you're really proud of. And that's where we say use data to kind of play up your strengths. You also want to use data points to clearly describe the challenges you're facing. I think candidates, what we find, are asking really good questions. They are a little shy, and some folks have been in situations where they didn't know the full picture before walking into a role, and they weren't successful in the role because they didn't have all the information. You want to definitely put your best foot forward. You want to talk about all the great things you're doing, but you also want to talk about the things that are going to be challenging. And so strong candidates are going to look for metrics regardless of the role. So if you can speak to the size of your campus planning budget, the size of your workforce, the percentage of work orders that you're going through, how far along are you in implementing a new system? You want to use metrics wherever you can. The next thing to really think about before you launch is salary benchmarking. It's one of the first things that we get asked when we talk to a candidate is if a range has not been shared, they want to talk about what the expectation is relative to salary. Being very clear, many states restrict you from asking a person what they are currently making. Be very mindful of where you are and in your hiring practices. That is not something that is legally that you're able to do with a candidate, is to say, what is your current compensation? The question to ask is, what are your salary expectations? But before you ask a person their salary expectations, make sure you know what your expectations are. And so that's where public data can really be helpful. You can go look at 990s, you can look at public institutions that report out on salaries, but you want to be really mindful that not all public salaries are full compensation. A lot of times those are the base salary. They don't take into account other compensations like benefits. If there's performance-based goals, those are not always going to be reflected. So they're not always completely accurate. And you also need to take into account if a person's been in their role for 20 years, they may not be at the same kind of pay band that a person who has moved every maybe 5 to 7 years would be at, because every time you move, you're typically moving up in your salary range. And as we know, sometimes if you stay in a role for a long time, you're not always moving at the same pace as those who have left the organization. So make sure you're doing your research, but also the last piece is your internal equity. You really want to understand what folks around you within your organization are being paid, because you want to make sure you're balancing internal equity with what the market is dictating. So it's really tricky, but if you do the research in advance, you'll be able to have confident conversations with candidates who ask the question, what are you looking to pay for this role? If you do list a salary range, there are some states that require salary ranges to be listed. There are some institutions that are doing that as a best practice. Just know humans are going to kind of go for the top. They're going to go for the top of your range. They're going to push you to the high end. So make sure if you have a range, you have a clear metric of where a person is going to come in at a certain point in the range. If you've asked for 5 to 7 years of experience as a requirement or a preferred qualification, if a person's coming in with 5 years, make sure you articulate where they would come in at that salary range. So be very mindful if you've shared a range, what the metrics are tied to relative to where you'll bring a person in. And the last piece, and I think this is really important, is defining the search process. You really want to make sure you have a timeline and process at least defined. You want to have a roadmap. You don't want to be beholden to a process, but you want to at least have some guide rails. So we always say, make sure that you are in the marketplace long enough to start to see people come forward and show interest. For us, when we're doing searches at that director level and above, we really push to have at least 6 weeks in the marketplace. 6 to 8 weeks is a fairly standard time frame to have a senior level role in the marketplace. That might not always be the case for the type of role that you're putting out there, but make sure you build in time to the timeline for being in the marketplace to seek out candidates and to reply to candidates. You also want to make sure that if you do have a committee, you let them know what it is that you expect of them. Are they an advisory committee? Are you looking to them to just give feedback on the strengths and weaknesses of the candidates they've interviewed? Are you looking for them to be a selection committee? Are you asking them to rank and select the candidates that you consider for interview? That's a very different point. So you want to make sure you have a clear understanding with your committee how you want to partner with them. You also want to make sure that you have phone screen questions already laid out in advance that you're going to ask of every person you talk to. You want to make sure that they are the same if possible, so that when you get to a point you're starting to compare candidates and thinking about who you want to move forward, you can go back to those phone screen notes and really have apples and apples to compare versus apples and oranges. So being prepared and making sure that you're defining the process relative to the timeline, saving dates. Once you set the timeline and you say, I know I want to do a selection meeting, or I know I want to do interviews, save the dates. It's easier to pull back time than it is to find time. So if you can put some save the dates out there with your committee and with key stakeholders, they will be very grateful. They'd rather be given time back than be asked to find time within a moment's notice. The other thing that we have found that's been really helpful is creating opportunities for the hiring manager to have a 30-minute screening call or Zoom with either your first round candidates or before candidates move to a campus visit. We've been in situations, and Katie's going to talk about where searches can go wrong. We've been in situations where a pool of candidates have come to campus. They've been through the search committee, they've been through the various stages, and they finally meet the hiring manager, and for some reason, there's not a viable connection around the work that they're looking to do, or that they need to collaborate on, or goals that they both have for the role. You want to know that sooner rather than later. And so we think a pre-visit screening call, it's really 30 to 40 minutes. Maybe you're doing it with 3 to 5 people. It is well worth the time invested to really get a sense of, is this a partnership that's going to be viable? So those are some things that you can think about as you think about, planning before you launch, having your rubric in place of what am I going to be reviewing these candidates on. You want to do all of these things in advance. You're going to hear Katie and I talk about momentum throughout this entire presentation, but keeping momentum is so important. And if you have this done in advance, you'll be able to move forward very quickly once you launch the search. All right, Katie.
One other thing on that is that, if you develop a good rubric or a good template for a pace of research, it's something you can use again and again. So, you don't have to sort of reinvent the wheel and go back to, starting from scratch every time. If you had a process that you thought went well, now you have the tools all set out for a next search process as well. So we'll move in a little bit of a different direction. Let's say you've gotten all your pre-work done and you're ready to post your job. That's some ways to think about how to identify talent. As the graphic says, post and pray, I think is sort of the standard way. You post the position in lots of places, the Chronicle, with APA, with particular organizations, and hope for the best, or on your own internal website and hope for the best. But there are lots of ways to think about where else to look for candidates, and depending on the kind of resources and time that you have, there's some things to do to think about where else you might look for people to come to build a good diverse pool of candidates for you to think about. So divide and conquer is around thinking about what other directions to look in. So one important way to do that is to really use internal resources, right? So asking stakeholders if they have recommendations, or asking stakeholders if they've worked with people that they are impressed with or felt would be a good match for your organization, or have they attended a meeting or a seminar that they've been impressed with, and who was involved in that. Thinking and asking stakeholders, what the important characteristics are about a good candidate will give you an opportunity to think about where else does that set of characteristics live. Is it beyond the classic higher education background? Are there people in the community colleges that could do work like this? Are there people in healthcare? Are there people in the broad not-for-profits or in the government that might have a similar kind of skill set that could really map on well, and moving in those directions to look for potential candidates. Not just waiting for the replies to the postings, but taking some time to reach out to people who haven't necessarily applied, but to whom you may reach out to say, we've posted this terrific job, we're looking for someone with these this skill set. Maybe you're interested, or if you're not interested, do you know anybody that we should reach out to? One thing that we've learned about APA is that it's just incredibly well networked, right? People are very willing to connect and offer suggestions, and people know each other well and for a long time. So lots of opportunity to reach out to people and ask for good suggestions or other sources to look at. And I think if you think about some of the best people you've hired, or some of the people who have grown into the role to be really important contributors to your organization, they may not have come up a traditional path. They may have come from a different path, but have that kind of set of personal characteristics that really match to the mission of your organization really well. So thinking slightly outside of the traditional path in, I think, can bring a set of candidates to the table that look a little different, and that bring us something a little bit different, and that really help to grow your organization on a lot of dimensions. Many of the folks that are on this call, I'm sure, have attended lots of regional meetings for APA, and lots of speakers, and APA U, lots of speakers. And so, what other seminars or webinars or kind of professional organizational events have you attended where you've been impressed by people, and how to think about, are those people who could be potentially good candidates or good sources to network with, to reach out to say, we've posted this ad and we'd love your thoughts or suggestions. And again, sort of circling back to developing a position description that's a bit more than the must-haves, can really work as a kind of a marketing tool for you. If you have a one-pager that talks about some of the big projects happening on your campus or some of the big projects ahead, those are the kind of sort of one-pagers about opportunities that you can email to folks to say, here's what we're looking for. If you have ideas, we'd be really glad to hear them. So thinking about it not just as a best of what's applied, but spending a little bit of time looking in a few different directions and seeing what other suggestions might come.
Great, thanks, Katie. I think you'd always be surprised at how willing people are to offer advice or names or send you in a direction that maybe you weren't thinking about. And so really the encouragement is just to be direct, really be direct and ask the question, ask for what you're looking for. Be very specific in your outreach. Some of the things that we do is we look at the top 25 organizations that are either based on size or scale or ranking. We look at the 25 organizations above the institution's rank, and we look at the 25 below. Those are easy places to reach out to the person in the current role to say, hey, how did you end up in your role? What was your path? You also want to look at the regional institutions to see, who's doing good work in your region that you can reach out to initially just as a source, just to say, we've got this role and we're looking for great talent. So people want to help, people want to support. But be very direct in what you're asking of them. I find if we're too soft, people don't really know that we're really asking for help. So be very direct. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is candidate communication. So I think it's really important, and this goes both ways, whether you are a candidate or you are the hiring manager. Being really proactive and transparent in your communication throughout the hiring process really will lead to a successful result. Making sure you are being as clear as you can be about the experiences you bring to the role and the experiences you're looking for. And so we're going to go back to the same point I mentioned earlier, is putting your best foot forward, making sure that you are identifying the key challenges and opportunities early, especially if you're on a phone screen. Build in time to tell the candidate what's going to be hard about the role, and then ask them, when you think about what I've just shared, are there experiences that you have had that would enable you to tackle some of these things that we need you to tackle? And if they can start to, in that phone screen conversation, give you some real tangible feedback about things they've done, systems they've built, work they've completed, teams that they've managed, then you're going to have a sense that they're going to be able to potentially do the work that you're asking of them. I have had situations where there have been things that are not great happening in an organization, and we've encouraged the client to allow us to share some of that information early. What that has done is we've weeded out people that don't have the desire to do hard things. There are some folks that they're saying that's just not what I'm looking for right now. And we've been able to focus our time and energy on talking with folks that are excited about being builders. They're excited about taking on a challenge. But it's important that you're not only talking about the things that are going really well. You also want to make sure that you're giving them a realistic view of the things that are going to be hard. So that's one of the things that has always worked well for us. It's also really important to share the search plan as much as possible. You don't want to tell them specific dates and then not meet expectations, but it is important to say, we're looking at this process running over the next 8 to 12 weeks. We anticipate moving to interviews potentially in this month or in these 2 weeks. We'd love to have this person on board by this date. When you start to share a search plan and set expectations around timing, it really helps the candidate become more invested, and they're typically going to offer you more information about what's going on in their life. Also, don't be afraid to ask, what is it that you're looking for? Is there a time frame that you're looking to be in your next role? Are you active in other searches? Are there other folks that you're talking to? I want to make sure I'm as competitive as I can be. So communication is key. Don't be afraid to ask those hard questions or share information, because that'll just open the door for the candidate to share what's on their mind. I find the piece that sometimes gets missed, and this is where you can get off track and lose a candidate, is if you forget to check in. So put a reminder on your calendar to check in with candidates. Block an hour, check back in with those candidates you've done a phone screen with, especially the ones that you think could be competitive. Your days are full with your full-time job. Hiring is not your full-time job. So make sure you put a calendar. And then the last piece is prepping your candidate. You really want to make sure that candidate can put their best foot forward. You're not giving them the answers relative to, here's how you're going to kind of get this role, or here's how you should answer a question. But you want to say, you're going to go into a meeting with 5 individuals. This is their role in our organization. Here's what they are excited about with this role. Here's how they hope to partner. You want to help prepare the candidate so they can put their best foot forward when they meet with whether it's your committee or your key stakeholders. So those are the things that we would say relative to candidate communication that can really help you move things forward. And if you are the candidate, be prepared to answer some questions that may feel uncomfortable, whether it's, why are you in a new role, or why are you looking, or what are you looking for, or what have you built? Make sure you're prepared to offer some tangible examples. Always have some examples in your back pocket that you can put forward.
Ken, that's a great point about, it can really move in 2 directions. It's, good advice for how to manage candidates, but it's also good advice if you are the candidate to understand that communication is key, that if you're the hiring manager, it's important to know, all the variables that you can know. And if you're the candidate, it's important to share what's important about your candidacy to the hiring manager. I think one of the things that you're testing in a process is the match or the chemistry, right? And so early on, these are the ways that you learn about how a candidate might be a good fit.
So I think the other piece that we get asked about a lot is navigating internal interest in candidacy. I think sometimes we talk about, internal versus external candidates. But I think the more important conversation and what we get asked the most about is the internal piece. We're happy to talk about external candidates and, how you assess, internal talent versus external, but more importantly, it's how you navigate that relationship with those individuals that are already valuable community members. And so one of the things we recommend very strongly is to actively invite internal candidate interest, but also be ready to manage expectation. Sometimes it feels like a gray area in an institution whether a person should put their name forward or not. You want to remove the gray area from the table. If this is a position that is truly open to internal candidates, say that. If it's not, make that very clear, but make sure you have the rationale as to why you won't be entertaining internal candidates for the role. But really, you want to be the one as the hiring manager to state to your community that you welcome internal candidates to show interest. I think this actually gives you a lot of information you wouldn't have if you didn't put that invitation out there, because by inviting internal candidates to share their interest, there's a number of benefits to you. Number one, it may expose a person you never had any indication or clue that they were interested in moving forward in your community or into a new role. That's going to open a conversation with that person that might not ultimately lead to them applying for the role, but it'll allow you to open a conversation to say, hey, I was surprised that you put your name forward. I'd love to hear why. Why this? Why now? You really want to be assessing motivation. If they start to tell you things that, aren't clear motivators for what you're looking for in this person, you need to be open with sharing with them, what it is that you're not hearing in the why this, why now. And maybe you will assess that there's another way for them to take on more in their role. Maybe it's not the position you're posting, but maybe it's something else. Maybe they simply are looking for, I'd love to have the opportunity to train others, or I really want the opportunity to manage a direct report. So maybe there's something you can do within their current scope that you can tweak just a bit that kind of meets their needs, but also doesn't deter them from staying, really committed to your organization. So really assessing the motivation, why this, why not, is really important. And then if you get to a point where you and that person feel like, they're going to truly be an internal candidate, they're going to put themselves forward, the hard question we always ask internal candidates, and maybe it's easier because we are external partners, but I always ask an internal candidate to put themselves in the headspace of, what if you aren't the candidate of choice? How is that going to feel? How are you going to be able to move forward in your current work? Because sometimes they don't even think about that question unless you ask it of them. You don't want to take them down a path of, you're not getting the role, but you want to make sure you ask them to start to think about how you can be a good partner to them if for some reason the position doesn't move in their direction. You also want to ask them, project yourself into the role. What if you do get this role? How are you going to navigate moving from a peer to a manager? How will you navigate, being in a different role and turning some of those responsibilities over to people within the organization? Are you going to be able to remove yourself from that day to day? So asking those hard questions early will really help you develop that relationship with your internal candidate. You really want to be very transparent in sharing the process with the internal candidate. You want to make sure that they get a sense of the assessment criteria and the search process in the same way an external candidate will. That's one of the pieces that I see missed most often. Internal hiring managers assume the internal candidate already knows how the search works because they're there, they've been a part of searches before, or they've seen how a process has worked, and they say, oh, well, they already know how this works. I don't need to share kind of all of the steps along the way. We always kind of frame the conversation with, you probably already know this, but I want to make sure you hear everything our external candidates are hearing. I want to tell you the same thing. Also, you want to share constructive feedback to retain your valuable internal talent. If for some reason an internal candidate is not moving forward in a search, actively schedule a meeting with them to share that information and to tell them exactly why. If that's something that you feel comfortable doing, it goes a long way to making sure they feel good about the process that they were just a part of. So making sure you navigate the internal candidate relationship is one of the most important things you can do to retain talent. And for us, candidate care is one of the things I think as partners we bring to the conversation, and we really take good care with your internal candidates. Katie, is there anything else you would share about internal candidacy that I haven't?
Yeah, I would just only add that if you are the internal candidate, something we always tell internal candidates is that you have an incredible advantage and an incredible disadvantage as the internal candidate, sort of a double-edged sword. Of course, the obvious advantage is that you know more about the institution and the role and the organization than others do. But the disadvantage is that people might think they know you based on their last interaction with you, but really may not know the scope and scale of all that you've done. So as an internal candidate, important to bring to the process, an opportunity to really kind of reintroduce yourself to those people who may think they know you, but really may not.
Thank you. So this is, I think, one of the most interesting parts of our work is how we get back on track. So Katie, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so you've done everything right. You posted in all the right places. You've done the hard work to get down to a short list. And then, for some reason or another, for lots of reasons you can predict and a few that you could never have predicted, the wheels fall off and you're at the brink of, sort of the worry of a failed search. And those can happen for lots of reasons. And so when something happens and things sort of get off track and you find yourself in a position where things don't look like there's a clear path to the end of a search or a good good end to a search. That's the point to sort of stop and really circle all the way back to the beginning of how you prepared for the search, and to really look again, I think importantly, at the position description you put together. And then really measuring the key criteria that you heard in the stakeholder meetings, the important criteria that you heard from partners and from senior people and from colleagues about what they're really looking for, and really refocus on those things and then matching those things against the pool. So I think what happens sometimes in a search process is that one very exciting candidate could emerge that has something very exciting in their background that really that becomes so appealing and attractive that they almost feel like a head and shoulders above every other candidate, and that can sort of derail the idea that it's important to really measure the candidates against the criteria in the position description. So and then it's easy to do to get sort of starstruck by one particular candidate and not realize that there may be other people in the pool that really are bringing maybe ticking more boxes, or maybe ticking different boxes that are also really important and may better match the criteria. So sort of circling back to make sure the candidates in your pool are really matching the criteria, and to really make sure that you have as a process really consistently assessed the candidates against that, not just be sort of taken by someone who brings something really shiny or really exciting to the role. So keeping the process a process is really an important part of getting back on track if it goes off the rails. I think important to really build in some wiggle room where you can, because working with people, things are going to happen. Someone's going to seem incredibly excited about the role, and you think it's a done deal until they speak with their family and have a rising junior that refuses to move. So some of that is going back to effective candidate communication throughout the process. So when you first meet a candidate and you ask them about their interest in the role and what's bringing them to the opportunity, and how they're thinking about it, and what might be, if any, challenges, revisiting those conversations throughout the process as each stage is, as you move to each stage, to really make sure that communication is happening. And to a point that Kenna made earlier, is asking questions like, are you in other searches? So disappointing to get to a finalist who gets another offer and takes that offer first. So as the search moves on, it's a lot about communication and a lot about asking questions and making sure you're hearing the right, getting answers to the questions that you can make sure you're on solid ground where you are. The other thing is that momentum, losing momentum can really ruin a search, right? So you have 2 or 3 candidates you're very excited about and you want to move them forward, and then 2 or 3 weeks goes past, they don't hear anything. People, when they don't hear anything, they, by human nature, assume that equals no interest. So, that kind of keeping momentum going, keeping contact open, even if it's dropping just a quick email to say, I know we haven't scheduled the dates yet, but we're working on it, or we're collecting feedback and hope to be able to get back to you quickly. Just keeping that momentum building, and keeping something happening is really, really important to both, when you've lost momentum, to get back on track, or one of the really most common reasons why a search goes off the rails is just a period of quiet where people don't hear anything. I think, in order to think about making it successful, you really are starting a process thinking about, when you meet with stakeholders or even through the listening sessions, that who are the people in your organization who are going to help not just select the candidate, but help that candidate be be successful in your organization. So getting stakeholder feedback and beginning to think about what kind of supports that person might need, whether it be just making connections in other parts of the organization, or making connections within your organizations. Thinking about feedback from people is really, really important, is a really, really important tool, as is really understanding from the candidates what they're really looking for, right? So if you have a range and you have a candidate that you're really interested in who is above the range and you can't reach that, thinking about what the other benefits could be. Do you have a tuition remission program that they may want to pursue a degree for themselves, or if there's a dependent child tuition program that you can offer? Are there do you have an incredibly flexible work schedule? Are there holidays at your institution that are beyond the holidays that everyone else gets? Some institutions close for 2 weeks over the winter holiday break. Sort of thinking really broadly about beyond the salary compensation, what your institution does well and can offer to kind of sweeten the pie a little bit, or to really make it the most attractive it can be. And all along, so importantly, what seems obvious but is so important is really messaging to your candidate, we really want you to join our team. And here's, we're working hard to make it make that happen, so that, people really hear that they're the selected person. And again, if you think of yourself as a candidate in a process, you think about the things that really really meant something to you as a candidate in the process, kind of replicating that and really using that as a guideline to what you think your candidates will want to hear.
Katie, I know we're running up on the final 10 minutes, and we want to make sure everybody has time for questions, but I just wanted to make one more remark here around the ghosting and sleuthing. So that's to Katie's point of just like not communicating. Candidates start to get worried, but more so when you know someone in the industry and you phone a friend, and then the candidate finds out about it, and it was supposed to be confidential, that person wasn't a reference. I wanted to make sure I put a point there. We've had some candidates who have stepped back from searches because, folks on your campus have made phone calls that we weren't ready for. And so I would say be really mindful with your community to let them know that you are collecting and managing their feedback. You want to hear everybody's voice, not just the person who has the loudest voice. You want to make sure you gather all the information and that you will be doing references. So being mindful that you're respectful of the candidate's experience as well, and asking for references. And if you do want to do an off-list reference, someone that the candidate didn't provide, we regularly recommend you don't necessarily you're not asking permission, but that you at least let the candidate know, I'd like to reach out to this person. I know them from previous work, and give them a phone call. Is there any reason I shouldn't do that? I think it's important to try to have a respectful relationship in that way. So last slide before we move to our Q&A is onboarding and retention strategies. Katie, do you want to do this one?
Sure. So, the important part about onboarding is, creating, the hard part was getting the person through the door. The next step is to make sure they get there and stay there, and have a meaningful impact on your organization. So making sure that as the hiring manager or the person responsible for making the hire, to make those introductions to stakeholders, to peers, to people who are vendors, to all the way around, so that this person has a really good start to who the important people are that they'll be working with, and can really build from that. One thing that you can learn from references is asking a reference, how does this person work best, is great information for you to be able to build that kind of plan for onboarding. This person works best when you can be really clear about the goals, and then you're thinking about that as you build an onboarding plan. Checking in at 30, 60, 90 days to make sure you're on the right path, that you're hearing the right things, that they're hearing the right things, and really mindful of what they're learning and where they might need to really learn. And again, building in that same kind of stakeholder partnership across the institution about, what are people hearing? What are you hearing about this person? And really understanding where the support needs to be to build that path for success. And I think mentorship is really crucial, whether that's an internal mentor or an external mentor from a professional organization. That really makes a huge difference. And of course, as we're all enjoying today, an organization like APA and how they have the incredible variety of continuing education resources for people. This is a really nice idea to set the new person on their path, and also remind people in your organization of how important continuing education is, and a nice jumping off point to offer that as well.
Thanks. And I think one thing you can also do is make sure you send people to this new person. Sometimes it's hard for organizations to get used to not coming to you for an answer. And so if you have a new person in an organization that's just started, be consistent in directing partners to talk with them first. And then obviously you're there if they need your support. But really bolstering your new hires' confidence and place in the organization by sending people to them to ask the question. I think that sends a lot of confidence to the organization, but also to the person. So now onto the Q&A portion. We're all ears.
Okay, well, we have some questions. And one of the first questions is, a majority of higher education is Associate Vice President of Facilities Management versus Vice President of Facilities Management. Do you push for VP designation to your clients in the search?
I think it can depend on the organization. I mean, I do think that a title can message, a size and scale and scope of a role and where it sits in an organization. It doesn't necessarily do that, but it can do that. I think the question is, what are the other titles in the organization, and what is the significance of titling? So in some places, titles are super compressed, and that really isn't reflective of the size and scale of the organization. But in an organization where other people, on a peer level have that titling, some of that is really just by history, not really by anything, any design. So I think important on the part of before you start a search to go into the market with the most attractive title. You can go to attract the best candidates, but understanding how that fits in your own particular organization.
Yeah, and Katie, I would just say as a candidate, I think questioning a VP title versus an AVP title and making sure that there is the authority behind a VP. I know there are some organizations that for reasons they can't pay at the same level of another organization. So what they can do is offer a title, but sometimes it doesn't come with the same level of responsibilities or leadership opportunities that an AVP would at another institution. So as a candidate, make sure you're asking those questions about, why VP versus AVP, what's the opportunity for growth within the title structure, making sure you understand that there is some opportunity for growth as well.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is it a good idea to use the same people on the interview team so they know the candidates and could suggest a candidate for an open position, or is it better to select different people for each different hiring interview?
Question. I think you want to be, I always recommend that you have a committee that represents key stakeholders, people that sit outside of your direct organization, and also some internal stakeholders so that they can really assess experience and the criteria needed to do the role. I don't have a preference relative if it's the same group that's doing interviewing search to search. I think it really is, you need to look at what the search is to begin with, and what are those key stakeholders. Most of the time, those search committees will need to be different from each other. So I would go at it from the perspective of what is the role first.
Yeah, and just remember that recruiting is a two-way street, right? So you aren't just you aren't just selecting, you're also selling, right? So you want to make sure that a certain amount of the process to encourage a candidate to keep moving forward in a process is that you're bringing people who can really talk about your institution in a way that people will want to join.
Okay. Next question is, should I be worried if an applicant has moved every couple of years?
Not necessarily. I think there's a couple of things. It really depends on the position, and it depends to a great degree on what those moves have been. So, Kenna, you'll join in, I know, too, on this. But if the every 2-year moves have been from assistant director to executive director, then that indicates progression. That's great. If it's from the top role in a small institution to a number 2 role in a larger institution, again, that might indicate a progression or a growth in responsibility. I think it's really, really important to ask people why they made the moves and to really assess if that pans out.
Agreed, Katie, completely. And I think, if you are seeing key experiences on the person's resume that really speak to the role that you're looking to fill, start there. If those key experiences are things that you would value, that your institution would value, then ask the question of why the moves. Because I think, gaining experience and doing jobs, especially the hands-on work that comes with many of the facilities planning and management roles, it's hard to duplicate. And those individuals are very sought after, and they're being approached often for new roles. And so it's not an indication of not being able to kind of do the work or not being able to collaborate, but you should ask the question. The phrase we often use is, we will need to heavily reference the moves. You want to make sure you're asking for a partner in each of those institutions that the person has moved to, so that you can assess why they moved when they moved.
I mean, sometimes the answer that you hear to that question is one that does give you pause. If every move is, they didn't understand me, nobody agreed with me, those are questions, those are answers that you should be paused. You should be thinking that there are more questions to ask. Sometimes the quick move has to do with people. Their mentor or boss got a great opportunity and asked them to join them at that next institution, and that's a perfectly good answer. So there are good answers to those questions, but there are also answers that should give you pause.
Okay, well, we have time for one more question, and that is, how do you handle finding false information on resumes?
Great question. So our process is, we do what we call a social media negative press check. It's just a simple search online. We're looking at LinkedIn. We also, we work with a partner that helps us do a degree verification. So that's just checking that they have the degrees from where they say they have. Typically, we are doing an employment check when you get to a finalist stage or when you have a candidate of choice. Background checks will give you the information you're looking for, because you are literally checking where they're currently employed or where they have said they're formally employed. But we do a lot of due diligence in advance, talking with individuals once we receive their resume, asking about their time at that institution. We, like I said, double check on LinkedIn. We double check on the organization's website. One of the easiest ways to check if a person is where they say they are is go to the website to see if you can find their name. So we are doing a lot of that due diligence on the back end before we even share a resume with our clients. Katie, would you add anything?
Only that if you find a discrepancy on a resume, you should ask the person directly. And I think you'll find a lot about what you need to know about a person in the way that they answer that. I mean, people do make mistakes, right? People type things and they're inaccurate and they're not intentional, and that whatever the answer is will tell you a lot. And then there are people who, flat out misrepresent themselves, and it's important to, to understand that too. So, so I think again, the human factor is certainly there, but important to dig in and ask questions.
Okay, well, that's all the time we have today. We have a couple questions that we were not able to get to, but I will forward the questions to Katie and Kenna, and they will reach out directly to you to answer your questions. So Kenna and Katie, thank you so much for a very informative webinar today. And to our attendees, as always, thank you for taking time out of your extremely busy schedule to be with us.
Thank you. It was our great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yep, and let's be kind to one another. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye now.
Bye.